Part 4, UFO Disclosure, Reptilians and the Antichrist. Today in Part 4 of this series, we are investigating David Icke and others' theory of shape-shifting, mostly human or human-looking entities into reptilians or reptilian-looking entities. No matter what, whether we agree that a hybrid race can or cannot be bred, I think one of the probabilities which halts us in our tracks and prohibits us from considering even the possibility of such a phenomena is the shape-shifting narrative. We are only too aware that to change from a smooth-skinned human to, say, a scaly green reptile will require a huge molecule rearrangement in our bodies and skin. Or does it? Does it really? Let's investigate. The central argument of mass and cellular restructuring is an insurmountable physical barrier to the traditional shape-shifting theory. From a scientific, or then a more plausible standpoint, it is far more understandable and acceptable that any observable change would be a subtle physiological shift rather than a true full physical transformation. However, by explaining the possible phenomena as a series of biological responses, specifically then things like a shift in skin pigmentation, precise muscular contraction, say to change the pupil of an eye, and other metabolic changes, to explain it as a series of separate and individual biological responses rather than just a magical immediate response will indeed make it sound more like science than magic. In the animal kingdom, and in particular among reptiles and fish, we do see, let's call it, willful change in color, size, or even shape, as normally a defense mechanism or a way to scare off predators, or even as signaling, for example, when they are ready to mate and make babies. We are not going to get too technical, but in order to try and understand how it could be possible for a human to change in appearance without surgery, we need to understand how this happens in animals. Dermal chromatophores are specialized pigment containing light-reflecting cells found in the skin of amphibians, fish, and reptiles. Human skin cells mostly rely on a single pigment, yes, indeed, melanin, we all know that, to absorb light, whereas chromatophores allow animals to sometimes drastically change their skin color and patterns on the body. In cold-blooded animals, these chromatophores are not scattered randomly, but they are stacked in 3 layers in the dermis. The top layer contains carotenoid or petridine pigment, which, like the name suggests, produce yellow, orange, and red hues. The middle layer does not contain pigment at all, but instead it contains microscopic crystals which act like tiny little prisms or mirrors, reflecting and scattering light to produce iridescent blues, silvers, and metallic greens. The bottom layer contains melanin, which acts as a, almost a dimmer switch by producing dark brown and black. Now, animals change color in 2 ways. First, the fast shift. like the real-time color shifting as we see in chameleons and octopuses and cuttlefish. It happens in seconds or minutes and is controlled by the nervous system and hormones, like adrenaline. Now, simple example. When one of these animals are triggered by stress or temperature or the need to hide, the cell pushes the pigment outward, spreading it across the entire surface of the cell. That changes the color of the skin, as the color obviously now becomes more visible. It's no longer contracted in the center of every cell, but it is spread. There's also the morphological change, which is a change, a metamorphosis, if you will, which takes place over days and weeks or months. This typically happens during seasonal shifts or as an animal transitions from a juvenile to an adult. We are not going to investigate that at all, that slow change, because the topic here is whether it could be possible for a human to transition to something which resembles a reptile, at least in skin color and pattern. We are also sticking to David Icke's hypothesis of the royals changing in seconds or minutes and changing back at the same speed after staying in that form for an hour or two. So we are going to skip forward to using color and pattern change as means of communication and mood, because indeed many lizards use color shift as a means of visual language. They use color and pattern to signify aggression, a warning, or even as love language by simply shifting nervous system impulses to clear or cloud the bottom layer of the dermis. Remember, that's the layer with the melanin, the dark layer, okay? It can instantly, at will, transition from a smooth, even color to a dark, mottled color. Important in the human-reptilian hybrid hypothesis is that humans, normal, average, everyday humans, do not have nervous system controlled dermal chromatophores. But if you think this means that we cannot change color, you are sorely mistaken. Of course, there is the genetic and hereditary conditions like albinism and vitiligo, but although it is not exactly what we are talking about here, it is certainly linked in a big way, and we'll get back to that in a minute. First, we are going to remind you of the other ways humans change color or appearance, and you are going to kick yourself for not thinking about it yourself. The fastest way human skin changes color is through the cardiovascular system. When tiny blood vessels in or under our skin contract or expand, the amount of oxygenated blood near the surface changes instantly. For instance, when we blush, or even flushing, okay? Triggered by strong emotions or even alcohol or certain medications, the capillaries widen and floods the skin with oxygen-rich hemoglobin, turning it red or pink. Then there is pallor or vasoconstriction, also triggered by emotion like fear, shock, or even sometimes cold. The body releases adrenaline and diverts blood away from the skin to the internal organs, and the skin becomes pale, ashen, or white. There's also oxygen deprivation or cyanosis caused by any kind of respiratory distress, like strangling, but also certain heart conditions, where the hemoglobin turns dark or purplish due to a lack of oxygen. And that will first show up in the lips, under the nails, or even eventually all over the skin. There's also dietary pigmentation, where a person consumes excessive amounts, for instance, of carotenoids. Now, the word already tells you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about carrots, pumpkin, and squash, etc. And then the excess beta-carotene cannot be processed by the liver fast enough. It accumulates in the outer layer of the skin, and it turns the skin orange or deep yellow. We have also seen or read how chronic ingestion or exposure to silver particles can cause silver to bond with the skin, and when exposed to sunlight, a chemical reaction occurs, turning the skin slate grey or even blue. People used, and some still do, gold salts to treat rheumatoid arthritis. But prolonged treatment and exposure to sunlight can also cause blue-grey discoloration. Then we have other things like tanning and jaundice, etc. Thus, the human body is already not adverse to change. The difference being that we cannot do so at will. However, are you aware that as we speak, there is ongoing experiments and research into manufacturing camouflage clothing and gear which will be able to change color and pattern to blend in with the environment? I kid you not. Guess what technology they are using? Mostly the crystalline adaptations of the second layer of the reptile dermis. Don't believe me? Go Google it. But never mind, with the human body already not totally adverse to color and pattern change in the skin, and for a myriad of reasons, would it be possible, without being harmful, to change color and pattern after it inherited certain traits, a gene, whether dominant or not, from a humanoid creature with reptilian attributes? I don't think so. I think if albinism can be a hereditary trait handed down from one generation to the next, so could this be. Okay? I mean, if it is at all possible to breed a human-reptilian hybrid, then it will also be logic that such a hybrid would inherit genes from both parents, and therefore it will not be at all strange or impossible to change physical attributes using a functional nervous system, like reptiles do in their mating season, or humans do when blushing. All we'll need are more of those reptile dermal chromatophores. Again, is David Icke right, or is he totally crazy? Once again, using science and biology, we cannot prove him wrong. We cannot, in all good conscience, tell him that hybridization is impossible. Changing appearance is impossible, because it is not. I also think our aversion to the subject is because of language. We talk about shape shifting, whereas David Icke is not really talking about shape shifting. He's not talking about say for instance, bipedal becoming a quadruped. He is talking about a change in appearance via natural means. And that is certainly possible. Okay, in the next episode, we will be discussing Tim Curran's Antichrist theory and everything that has evolved from that theory in the meantime. So until then, please take good care of yourselves, stay vigilant, and stay safe. Bye.